The lantern light in the courtyard of the
They
Zhang
laugh at
household
me.
flickered against
My
the
own
carved
family.
wooden pillars, throwing
The
long
water they
shadows
throw
across the
feels
stone floor.
colder than their-
Mei Lin sat on the edge of the bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though her fingers twisted in the silk of her dress when she thought no one was looking. The air inside the compound always felt heavy to her, not because of the summer heat, but because of the eyes. Her mother's sharp, assessing gaze, her sister's smirking glances, her brother's dismissive laughter. She had grown used to being invisible, and yet not invisible enough. At 27, she was considered far past the age of a respectable match. In a family that prized sons above all, daughters at least had some worth if they could marry well or bear strong children. Mei Lin had neither. It had started with a doctor's whisper years ago, a murmured conclusion after her mother dragged her into town to find out why suitors turned away. "The girl's womb is weak," the physician had said. "It will be hard for her to carry life, perhaps impossible." The words had settled like dust in her mother's ears, and from that day forward, Mei Lin was treated as a cracked porcelain vase, something once pretty but no longer useful. Her mother, Madame Zhang, did not waste time repeating the verdict. She shared it with aunts, with cousins, with every neighbor who asked why her eldest daughter still remained unwed. Soon the town knew. Soon everyone knew. They did not speak the word infertile aloud often, but it lingered in every pause when women discussed matches, in every strained smile from potential in-laws, in every pitying look from the matchmaker who had long given up arranging visits for her. By 25, her younger sisters had all been married off. By 26, they had children crawling around their feet, and Mei Lin remained, a shadow in her father's house. "Pour the tea properly," her mother snapped one evening when relatives came to visit. "At least your hands are still steady, though heaven knows what good they are for anything else." The words stung less than they once did. Mei Lin lowered her gaze, poured the tea into each porcelain cup with care, and retreated into the corner as the conversation moved on without her. Inside, though, the words carved at her. She wanted to shout that she was more than her body, more than her womb, more than this quiet shame her family wrapped her in. But silence had long ago become her shield. To speak was to invite ridicule, and she had learned the art of stillness, of enduring. Her father rarely spoke to her at all. When he did, it was with the tone of a man who addressed a burden he could not yet cast off. He provided her food, a roof, clothing, duties of a patriarch, nothing more. She tried not to resent him, but in the quiet of her nights, she often pressed her face into her pillow and wept, wishing for at least one gentle word from him. The children in the courtyard, the nieces and nephews who already carried the Zhang name into the next generation, sometimes looked at her curiously. "Why don't you have babies, Auntie?" one asked once, tugging at her sleeve. Her sister silenced the child quickly, shooing him away with embarrassed laughter. Mei Lin only smiled faintly, the practiced smile she wore when the truth threatened to break through. It was in the late autumn when her fate was sealed. The family gathered in the great hall, her father seated at the head of the table, her mother beside him, her brothers and their wives, her sisters with children in their laps. Mei Lin stood at the far end, hands clasped, waiting for the announcement she had not been told in advance. Her father cleared his throat, his voice slow and deliberate. "We have received an offer." An offer. Mei Lin's heart leapt before she could stop it. Could it be, after all these years? A suitor, someone willing to overlook her flaw. But the glances exchanged around the table cooled that small flame of hope. Her brothers smirked. One of her sisters pressed a hand over her mouth to hide a laugh. "Old Thomas, the cowboy on the far ranch," her father said at last. "He has agreed to take Mei Lin as his wife." Silence. Then a burst of muffled chuckles from her brothers. Thomas, she had heard his name whispered in town, a widower, older than most of the fathers in the village, weathered by years in the sun, living in solitude with his horses and cattle. He had no children, no family left. Rumor said he barely came into town except to trade supplies. Some called him odd, some called him proud, but most dismissed him as a relic of another time. Her mother's lips curved in something like a sneer. "It suits, doesn't it? The infertile daughter for the old childless cowboy. At least one burden will be off our shoulders." The laughter that followed was not kind. Mei Lin felt her face burn, though her body remained still. Inside her chest, shame curled like a fist. They weren't offering her a new beginning. They were sending her away as a joke, a cruel way to rid themselves of her. Her father did not ask her opinion. He only gave the final word. It is decided. You will leave tomorrow. That night, Mei Lin sat alone by her window, the moon casting silver light over the courtyard, where she had spent so many years in quiet longing. She tried to imagine her future. A stranger's house. A man she did not know. No family near. It should have terrified her. It did, in part. But deeper than the fear was something else. A strange sense of relief. She had spent so long suffocating under her family's disdain that even the uncertain wilderness of marriage to an old cowboy seemed like freedom compared to this. She packed her few belongings at dawn, a folded silk dress her grandmother once gave her, a small wooden comb, a book of poetry she had hidden from her brothers. Her mother did not come to see her off. Her father merely nodded, impatient to have the matter concluded. Her sisters whispered behind their hands as she walked past, holding her bundle. One of them called out, "Don't forget to bring us back tales of your handsome husband." Laughter erupted again. Mei Lin lowered her head and walked on. At the gate, a cart waited to take her toward the edge of town, where Thomas would meet her. The driver barely looked at her, as though she were already a ghost. Mei Lin climbed into the cart, her bundle on her lap. She did not look back at the house. She had spent too many years memorizing every line of it, every shadow of its halls. As the cart jolted forward, leaving the Zhang compound behind, she felt the first sting of tears. They blurred the road ahead, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she breathed deeply, clutching her bundle tighter. She did not know what awaited her at the end of this road. She only knew it had to be different than what she was leaving behind. And perhaps, just perhaps, difference was enough. The cart rattled on, carrying her away from the only life she had ever known, toward the uncertain future that waited in the wide, open land. The road stretched out like a ribbon of dust and stone, vanishing into the horizon where the plains kissed the sky. Mei Lin sat stiffly on the wooden seat of the wagon, her bundle resting against her legs, the wind tugging strands of black hair loose from her braid. The morning sun was warm, but she felt no warmth in her chest. Each turn of the cart's wheels carried her farther from the familiar walls of her family home, farther from the only life she had known, even if that life had been cold. The driver said little, a leathery-faced man who hummed to himself and clicked the reins occasionally at the horse. Mei Lin kept her gaze forward, afraid that if she looked back she might see her family standing at the gate, laughing still, pointing at the sight of their eldest daughter being carted off like unwanted cargo. She would not give them that satisfaction, even in her imagination. Hours passed. The town shrank behind her, replaced by rolling fields and scattered farms. The rhythm of the wheels and the creak of wood lulled her into a strange quiet. She thought of the stories she had heard. Thomas, the cowboy, a man already gray at the temples, a widower who lived among cattle and silence. Some said he was harsh, others said he was gentle, but no one seemed to know him well. That mystery unsettled her more than anything. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of the plains where the earth rose into soft hills. The driver slowed the horse and pointed. "There," he muttered, his voice dry from hours of silence. Mei Lin followed his finger. A figure waited near a rail fence, broad-shouldered beneath a worn hat, with a horse standing tethered at his side. The man did not move much as they approached. He only watched, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. Her pulse quickened. This was him. This was Thomas. The cart creaked to a halt. The driver tipped his hat and muttered something about his pay, but Mei Lin barely heard. Her eyes were on the man who would now be called her husband. He stepped forward slowly, boots crunching on the gravel. He was tall, taller than her father, taller than most men she had known. His frame was solid, built from years of labor, his shoulders wide beneath his faded shirt. The lines on his face told of sun and wind, not cruelty. His eyes, when he lifted his hat to meet her gaze, were a surprising shade of blue, clear and steady. "Miss Zhang?" His voice was deep, calm, carrying a gentleness that startled her. She lowered her eyes out of habit. "Yes, I'm Thomas." He did not call himself by a title, did not announce himself with pride. He simply spoke his name, as though that was enough. She nodded, clutching her bundle tighter. The driver wasted no time. He tipped his hat again, turned his cart, and rumbled back down the road, leaving a swirl of dust behind. Mei Lin stood in the silence that followed, feeling exposed under the endless sky. Thomas shifted slightly, studying her with a patience she was not used to. Then he held out a hand. "The ranch isn't far. We'll ride." She hesitated. The horse beside him was tall, strong, its dark mane rippling in the breeze. She had never been so close to one before. In her family home, animals had been for labor, not companionship. She swallowed her fear and nodded. Thomas must have noticed her stiffness. He didn't press. Instead, he tied her bundle securely to the saddle, then mounted with easy grace. He extended his hand again, steady and unhurried. After a moment, Mei Lin placed her smaller hand in his, and he pulled her up behind him. The world felt different from the back of a horse. Larger, more alive. The steady gait carried them across the fields, wind sweeping past, sky stretching forever above. Mei Lin held the edge of the saddle, careful not to cling to him, though her balance wavered. Thomas said nothing, but she sensed his awareness of her unease. Occasionally he adjusted his hold on the reins so the horse moved more gently, as if to ease her fear. The ride was long enough that the silence between them began to feel less sharp. She found herself watching the way he moved with the animal, the quiet confidence of someone who belonged to this land. For a moment, she envied that ease. When the ranch came into view, she almost gasped. It was not grand, certainly nothing compared to the carved wood and tiled roofs of her family home, but it had a rugged beauty. A wide porch stretched across the front of the house, weathered by sun and rain. A barn stood tall nearby, with fences stretching out to contain cattle grazing in the fading light. Chickens pecked near the porch steps, and a dog barked in greeting, tail wagging furiously. Thomas slowed the horse and dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs trembled from the ride, but she straightened quickly, unwilling to appear weak. "This is home," he said simply, gesturing toward the house. "Home." The word caught in her throat. Could this place ever be that? Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and leather. The furniture was simple but sturdy. A man's house, every object placed for purpose rather than decoration. Yet it was not unwelcoming. A fire crackled in the hearth, and on the table sat a lamp already lit, its warm glow filling the room. "You'll take the room upstairs," Thomas said, pointing toward the narrow staircase. "It's been cleaned." She nodded, clutching her bundle still. She expected him to demand something of her, to instruct her as her father always had. But he did not. Instead, he removed his hat, set it on a hook, and busied himself stoking the fire. Hesitating only a moment, Mei Lin carried her bundle upstairs. The room was small but tidy. A bed with a quilt folded neatly, a small dresser, a window that looked out over the fields. It was more than she had expected. She set her things down slowly, her fingers brushing the quilt. For the first time in years, she had a space that belonged to her alone. That night, they ate quietly at the wooden table. Thomas had cooked, simple stew with bread, hearty and warm. Mei Lin was used to elaborate meals prepared by servants in her family home, but the food here tasted different. Honest. She found herself taking a second spoonful before realizing it. "You'll get used to the land," Thomas said after a long silence. "Takes time, but it'll come." She lowered her spoon, uncertain how to reply. No one in her family had ever spoken to her as if she belonged to anything. When the meal ended, Thomas cleared the dishes without comment. Mei Lin offered to help, but he shook his head. "You've had a long day. Rest." His kindness unsettled her almost as much as her family's cruelty had. She did not know what to do with it. That night, lying beneath the quilt in the small room, she listened to the wind outside. the soft creak of the house settling. Her heart was heavy with uncertainty, yet there was a strange quiet inside her too. No mocking voices, no laughter at her expense, only silence and the distant sound of horses in the pasture. For the first time in years, she did not cry herself to sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering who this man truly was and what kind of life waited for her in this wide, lonely land. Morning came with golden light pouring through the window. Mei Lin rose early, her body restless. She stepped outside onto the porch and felt the cool air on her face. The land stretched endlessly before her, open and untamed. She breathed deeply, the scent of earth and grass filling her lungs. Behind her, she heard Thomas's footsteps. He carried a pail of water from the well, his movements steady, practiced. He glanced at her but did not speak, only offered a nod before continuing with his work. She watched him for a long moment, something stirring quietly inside her chest. He was not like the men in town, nor like her father or brothers. There was no cruelty in his silence, no judgment in his gaze, only a steadiness, as though he were carved from the land itself. And for the first time, Mei Lin wondered if perhaps this cruel joke her family had played might lead her to something she had never known before, something dangerously close to peace. The first weeks on the ranch moved like the slow turn of the seasons. At dawn, the air smelled of dew and hay, and the sun spilled across the horizon in waves of gold. For Mei Lin, each morning began with the soft creak of floorboards beneath her bare feet, the chill of water on her skin when she washed, and the sight of Thomas already awake, already working. He moved through the land as if it were an extension of himself. She often watched him from the porch in those early days, his frame outlined against the rising sun, driving cattle, mending fences, or walking the pastures with his dog trotting at his side. There was no hesitation in him, no wasted movement. It was a life built on rhythm and labor, a life she had never known but now found herself drawn into. At first, she felt out of place. Her hands were soft from years of being told she was too fragile, too useless. When she tried to sweep the floors or carry water, her palms blistered quickly and she hid them under her sleeves. When she attempted to ride the horse again, her balance faltered and she nearly slipped. But Thomas never laughed. He never raised his voice. "You'll learn," he said once when she apologized, her cheeks burning with shame after dropping a bucket. His eyes were calm, the way a river is calm even when it carries great depth. "Takes time. The land doesn't ask for speed, just honesty." Honesty. The word settled in her heart like a seed. She began to rise earlier, eager to keep pace. She learned how to scatter grain for the chickens, how to milk the cow, how to patch small tears in the fences with careful hands. Her muscles ached each night, but there was satisfaction in the ache. For the first time, her work mattered. It did not feel like a performance to appease critical eyes. It felt like contribution, like belonging. Evenings were quiet but never empty. They ate together at the wooden table, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. At first, the silence unnerved her. In her father's house, silence meant judgment. But here, silence felt different. It was not sharp, not cold. It was space, room to breathe, room to think. Once, as they sat by the fire, Thomas looked up from sharpening his knife and asked, "Do you miss your family?" The question startled her. She had not expected him to care. She stared into the flames for a long moment before answering, "No." Then, softer, as if confessing to herself, "I miss what I wish they were." Thomas did not pry further. He only nodded and returned to his work, but something in his gaze lingered, a kind of understanding she had never received before. As the days turned into weeks, small moments began to shape something unspoken between them. One afternoon, she carried a basket of laundry to hang by the line. The wind lifted her hair loose from its braid, and she reached to tuck it back when Thomas came up beside her. Without a word, he handed her a clothespin that had fallen from the basket. Their fingers brushed, just briefly, but the warmth of that simple touch stayed with her long after. Another time, she tripped while carrying a pail of water, and though she caught herself before falling, Thomas was already there, steadying her elbow. "Careful," he said, his voice low, his hand strong but gentle. She nodded quickly, her heart pounding in ways she did not understand. At night, she often lay awake beneath the quilt, staring at the ceiling, replaying these moments. He was older, yes, his hair threaded with gray, his face lined with years, but in his steadiness, in his quiet respect, she found herself seeing something she had never seen in men before: safety. The land itself began to change her. She grew stronger, her skin darkened by the sun, her hands calloused by work. When she looked into the mirror one evening, she barely recognized the woman staring back, a woman who stood straighter, who carried herself with quiet pride. One afternoon, while tending the garden, she heard Thomas's voice from the barn. He was singing softly, a rough, low tune, worn by years but carrying warmth. She paused, listening, a smile tugging at her lips. He stopped when he noticed her, clearing his throat in embarrassment, but she only said gently, "It's beautiful." His ears reddened and he turned back to his work without reply. But later that evening, he left a small wooden carving on the table outside her room. A horse, delicate and simple, clearly made by his own hands. She picked it up, her heart swelling in ways she could not put into words. The days blended into a rhythm, each one deepening the fragile thread between them. And yet, beneath the warmth, Mei Lin carried a shadow. Each time she laughed, each time she felt her heart flutter near him, a voice in her mind whispered, "You are broken. You can never give him what he deserves. You cannot give him children." It haunted her in quiet moments. When she saw the children of neighboring families running through the fields, when she saw Thomas watching them with a softness in his eyes, she wondered if he missed what he had never had, if he longed for a legacy she could never provide. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, she could not hold it in any longer. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Thomas, do you regret this?" He looked up from his chair, brow furrowed. "Regret what?" "Taking me in. Marrying me. I know what people say. That I cannot. That I—" She swallowed hard, unable to finish. Thomas set down the pipe he had been holding and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. His eyes, steady and blue, met hers. "I didn't marry you for what people say, or for what they think you can or can't give. I married you because you're you. That's enough." Her breath caught. She had expected dismissal, maybe pity, but not this. He leaned back, his voice calm but firm. "A man can live with cattle and land all his life and still be empty. But when you walked into this house, it didn't feel empty anymore. Don't ever think you're less than enough." Tears stung her eyes and she turned her face away quickly. But he reached across the small space, his hand brushing hers in quiet reassurance. The warmth of his touch spread through her like sunlight breaking after a long storm. That night, when she lay in bed, her pillow damp with tears, she realized the walls inside her, walls built from years of shame and rejection, were beginning to crack. The next morning, she rose before dawn and joined him in the fields. Together they worked side by side, the land stretching wide around them, the sky blazing with sunrise. The silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like belonging. And though neither spoke of it, something unspoken had begun to grow, slowly, tenderly, like the first shoots of spring pushing through the hard earth. The sky had been restless all day, heavy with clouds that rolled low and dark across the horizon. The cattle shifted uneasily in the pasture, snorting and tossing their heads, while the dog whined at the porch steps as if warning of what was to come. Mei Lin paused in her work at the clothesline, her fingers tightening around the damp sheet she was pinning. She lifted her gaze to the heavens, her heart stirring with unease. Thomas came from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes scanning the sky. "Storm's coming fast," he said, his voice steady but alert. Mei Lin nodded. She had learned in her short time here to trust his instincts. When he spoke of the land, of the weather, of the animals, he spoke with certainty born of years, not guesswork. Already the wind was rising, pulling at her hair, snapping the wet sheets like sails. They worked quickly, gathering what they could, tying the shutters closed, moving supplies inside. The air grew heavier by the minute, the smell of rain sharp and electric. When at last the first drops fell, they came not as a drizzle, but as a sudden torrent, drumming against the roof, striking her face with cold needles as she hurried toward the porch. By the time they stepped inside, the world outside had become a blur of rain and wind. The fire in the hearth burned steady, and Mei Lin set about lighting extra lamps, their glows soft and golden against the storm's fury beyond the windows. Thomas moved with practiced calm, though Mei Lin could sense his alertness in every gesture, the way he checked the door latches twice, the way his eyes flicked toward the barn. "The animals will hold," he said as if to reassure them both. "They've weathered worse." They sat by the fire, the storm roaring like an ocean beyond their walls. Mei Lin wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold but from the memory of nights long ago when storms had shaken her family's house and she had lain awake alone, afraid. Tonight was different. The fear was there, yes, but it was shared. She glanced at Thomas, sitting solid in his chair, pipe forgotten at his side, his presence steady as the hearth itself. The hours passed slowly. Rain beat against the roof, wind howled through the eaves. Lightning split the sky, white against black, followed by thunder that rattled the glass panes. Mei Lin dozed lightly, her head against the arm of her chair, until a sound pierced the storm. A sound so faint she thought at first it was a dream, a cry, high, thin, fragile. She sat upright, heart thudding. "Did you hear that?" Thomas lifted his head. The cry came again, carried on the wind through the cracks in the door. He was on his feet instantly, reaching for his coat. "Stay inside," he said firmly, though she was already rising. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone's out there." They stepped into the storm together, rain lashing against them, mud sucking at their boots. The wind nearly stole her breath, but she pushed forward, clinging to Thomas's arm. The cry came again, clearer now, leading them toward the road that ran along the fence line. There, beneath the twisted branches of a half-fallen tree, they found it, a small bundle, soaked through, lying in the mud. Mei Lin dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she pulled back the wet cloth. A baby, tiny, pale, its face screwed tight with the effort of crying, her breath caught. The storm roared around them, but all she could hear was that cry. All she could see was the fragile life in her arms. She gathered the child against her chest, shielding it with her body. "Thomas," she gasped, her voice breaking, "it's a baby." He crouched beside her, rain streaming down his face, eyes hard with urgency. "We need to get it inside." They ran back through the storm, Mei Lin clutching the child close, her heart pounding with fear that it might stop breathing before they reached shelter. Inside, Thomas stoked the fire higher, threw dry blankets onto the chair. Mei Lin stripped away the wet cloth and wrapped the baby in wool, pressing it against her chest for warmth. The child's cries softened, though its breathing remained shallow. Mei Lin rocked gently, murmuring words she hadn't known were in her, words that came like instinct, like truth. "Hush now, little one. You're safe. You're safe." Thomas crouched nearby, his eyes never leaving her face. For the first time since she had met him, she saw something raw in his expression. Not the calm steadiness she had come to know, but something deeper, older, a longing he had hidden well. When at last the child quieted, drifting into exhausted sleep against her, Mei Lin looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. Who would leave a baby like this, in the storm? Thomas's jaw tightened. Someone desperate, or someone cruel, maybe both. Her arms tightened around the child. The weight of it was light, yet it filled her entirely. She could feel the faint rise and fall of its chest, the warmth slowly returning to its skin. She had thought her heart broken, thought her body incapable of such a bond. But in this moment, none of that mattered. Her whole being bent toward this fragile life with fierce, unyielding love. Thomas must have seen it in her face, for he said softly, "If this child found you, maybe it's because it was meant to." The words struck her lightning, not of fear, but of revelation. She pressed her lips to the child's damp forehead, closing her eyes. For years she had been told she was empty, incapable, worthless, and yet, here in her arms was proof that fate itself had defied those cruel words. Through the long night she did not let go. Thomas brought more blankets, more wood for the fire. He moved quietly, respecting the sanctity of what had fallen into their lives. Once, near dawn, he laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "You should rest. I'll take him for a while." She shook her head fiercely, clutching the baby tighter. "No, he needs me!" And Thomas only nodded, his eyes filled with something that looked very much like pride. When morning came, the storm had passed. The world outside lay drenched and shining, every blade of grass jeweled with rain. Inside, the baby stirred, opened its eyes for the first time, dark and unfocused. Mei Lin gasped softly, tears spilling anew. She looked at Thomas. "What do we do now?" He studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the child nestled against her. "Now," he said slowly, as if choosing the words with care, "we raise him." Her heart trembled. "We?" "We," he repeated firmly. "If you'll have it so." Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." The child yawned, tiny mouth opening wide, and Mei Lin laughed through her tears. She had not laughed like that in years, not with such pure joy. In that instant, she knew her life had changed forever. The ranch was no longer a place of silence and waiting. It was a home, and as Thomas placed a hand on her back, steady and sure, she felt the truth settle into her bones. She was no longer the daughter no one wanted. She was a mother. And she was loved. The baby brought life into the ranch in ways Mei Lin could never have imagined. Days once measured by chores and the quiet rhythm of the land now spun around the needs of the tiny child. His cries pierced the air at dawn, demanding food, warmth, comfort. His laughter, unexpected and bright, lit the rooms in a way even the fire could not. Mei Lin's arms grew strong from holding him, her body learning the rhythm of rocking, feeding, soothing. Her heart, once bound tight by shame, opened with each soft sigh against her chest. She named him Liang, after a word her grandmother had once whispered in her ear when she was a girl, a word that meant light. For to her, that was what he was, the light after endless years of darkness. Thomas did not question her choice. He only nodded when she told him, repeating the name slowly, letting it settle on his tongue like something sacred. "Liang," he said, and Mei Lin thought she heard tenderness in his voice that no one else would ever notice. He became father as naturally as he was rancher. His large hands, so used to rope and reins, cradled the baby with surprising gentleness. Sometimes, in the evenings, Mei Lin would find him on the porch with Liang tucked against his chest, humming low songs that vibrated through the night air. The sight would stop her heart for a moment, for it was everything she had never thought she would see. An old cowboy, a child in his arms, and a quiet happiness that reached them both. Weeks turned into months. The child thrived, his cheeks round and rosy, his tiny fingers tugging at Mei Lin's hair when she leaned too close. The townsfolk, curious at first, began to soften when they saw the family together. Some whispered still, speculating about where the baby had come from, about what it meant for the infertile daughter. But Mei Lin learned to let the whispers pass, like wind through the grass. For each time she looked into Liang's dark eyes, the voices faded. He was hers. That was truth enough. Still, a shadow lingered in her heart. She knew her family would hear. She knew their cruelty would not stay quiet forever. Then when at last the knock came on the door one spring morning, it was not the gentle knock of a neighbor, but the hard, commanding rap she remembered too well. Thomas opened the door. Standing there were her parents, her brothers, her sisters, an entourage of young faces, sharp and expectant. They had not changed. Her father's expression was still carved in stone, her mother's eyes still hard with judgment. Her brothers smirked the way they always had, and her sisters whispered behind their sleeves, their children clutching at their skirts. "Well," her mother said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation, "we thought we'd see how our joke turned out." Her father's gaze swept over the simple furnishings, the rough-hewn walls. "So this is where you ended up. I suppose it suits you." Mei Lin stood near the hearth, Liang in her arms. The baby stirred, as if sensing the shift in the air. Her instinct was to shield him closer, to protect him from the eyes that had never once looked at her with kindness. Her eldest brother laughed. Imagine that, our useless sister holding a child. Did you steal it? Or did the old man find a way to make you useful after all? Heat rose in her chest, but before she could speak, Thomas stepped forward. His presence filled the room, calm but unyielding. "That's enough," he said, his voice steady. The laughter faltered. Her brothers exchanged glances, unused to being silenced. But Thomas did not waver. He stood between Mei Lin and her family, as though the space itself belonged to him, his eyes hard as steel. "This is her home. If you've come to mock, you can leave now." Her mother sniffed, clearly unimpressed. "You think we'll be frightened off so easily? We came to see for ourselves, to see what became of the shame of our family." Shame. The word struck like an old wound reopened. Mei Lin tightened her hold on Liang, her breath catching. For a moment, the years fell away. The whispers, the cruel laughter, the weight of being unwanted. But then, Liang stirred again, his tiny hand pressing against her chest, and she looked down at him. He looked back with dark, trusting eyes, eyes that did not know shame or cruelty, and something shifted inside her. She lifted her gaze, meeting her mother's sharp stare. For the first time in her life, she did not lower her head. "I am not your shame," she said, her voice clear and steady. The room stilled. Her sisters gasped, her brothers blinked, her father's brows drew together. But Mei Lin did not stop. The words had waited too long inside her, and now they poured forth like a river breaking its banks. "You cast me out as a joke." "You said I was worthless, that I could never be a mother, that I was broken. And yet, look." She held Liang higher, the baby blinking at the sudden motion. "I am a mother, I am a wife, and I am more than anything you ever allowed me to be." Her voice shook with emotion, but not with fear. She stood straighter, her arms steady around the child. Thomas moved closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. His touch was firm, grounding, telling her without words that she was not alone. Her father's lips pressed into a thin line. "That child is not of your blood. He does not make you whole." Mei Lin felt tears sting her eyes, but they did not fall. She answered softly, yet with a power she had never known. "Blood does not make a family. Love does. And I have more love in this home than I ever had under your roof." Silence followed. Outside, the wind stirred through the grass, the faint call of a meadowlark drifting in. Inside, her family shifted uneasily, unused to being challenged, unused to seeing her stand with strength. Her mother's face twisted. "You ungrateful girl." "No." Mei Lin's voice cut sharp, firm. "I am no longer your girl. I am a woman. I am his wife." She nodded toward Thomas, whose eyes never left her. "I am this child's mother, and I will not allow you to belittle that. Not anymore." For a moment, her mother's fury flared, but Thomas stepped forward again, his tall frame blocking the way, his voice calm but unbreakable. "You've heard her. Now you'll leave." Something in his tone left no room for argument. One by one, her brothers' smirks faded. Her sisters lowered their eyes. Even her father's glare faltered, though he tried to hide it with a scoff. They turned, muttering, and left the house as quickly as they had come, their footsteps fading down the porch steps, swallowed by the open land. When the door shut behind them, silence fell. Mei Lin's knees trembled, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. But Thomas's hand was there, steady on her back, and Liang gurgled softly in her arms, as if laughing at her fear. Tears spilled then, not of shame, but of release. She pressed her face to her child's hair, breathing in the warm, sweet scent. "We are a family," she whispered, her voice breaking with joy. "We are enough." Thomas's arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close. "More than enough," he said softly. They stood together by the hearth, the child between them, the firelight painting their faces in gold. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields. For the first time in her life, Mei Lin felt no fear of the dark. She had her family now. Not the one she had been born into, but the one she had chosen. and the one that had chosen her. As the night settled over the ranch, she rocked Liang gently, Thomas's presence warm at her side, and she knew, with a certainty that filled her to her very soul, that she had finally come home. And so, what began as a cruel joke became Mei Lin's greatest blessing. Cast aside as unwanted, she found a new life, a true love, and the child that made her whole. The old cowboy and the daughter no one wanted built a family not from blood, but from devotion. And in the wide, wild West, they discovered that sometimes the harshest beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, so you never miss another heartwarming tale of love, resilience, and second chances beneath the open sky.